Welcome to Jung at Harp. I'm Kathleen Wiley, a Jungian psychoanalyst in North Carolina, and I am here with composer, artist, harpist Deborah Henson-Conant. We both play the harp, and that's why we call this Jung at Harp. This morning, we are talking about what to do when your focus becomes diffused. As we were beginning today, and by the way, this is episode 110. Our topic today grew partly out of our conversation last week about which impulse to follow and the idea of vision. And when does vision become something that takes us out of the present moment versus something that actually is containing us in the present moment and also helping us move on our path. So as we think about this, Deborah, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah, we were talking about it because we were talking about when there's a certain, you described it as a certain light. When you're really focused on something, you feel like there's a sort of a vision that's everything else is aside, but then there's this diffusion that you can kind of come into a situation, and it's like it's this diffuse light, and it can be as though you have so much and so many things that are calling for attention that it's hard to connect or make that laser beam connection with any one of them. And then you often end up in this sort of diffused action where nothing's actually moving forward. And we were talking about it because I'm in the midst of a big project I've been working on for decades, and it's coming to fruition. And like this weekend, it's everything's kind of coming together, everything is due. And at the same time, my cat is sick and there's other things going on. And so I can tend to get what might feel like anxiety, where it's just hard to do any one thing because of all the other things.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm thinking about how anxiety really is a felt sense in the body that scatters us. It's like I know my own experience of anxiety. It's like I'm ping ponging all over the place, but there isn't a forward movement. And so I do think that anxiety often accompanies this experience of getting caught in the diffuse places. I'm having so many thoughts.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I'm thinking about how the Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dead talks about when you're in the bardo states, that you need to really follow the bright light and not get distracted by the lesser lights, but how terrifying the bright light can be. The
When you
light
say
that it,
Bardo, when you say Bardo state, do you mean the state on towards death?
well, in the Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dying, they're talking about those states between the death of the physical body and then the soul essence moving on. That's my interpretation. Someone who is a scholar and a deeper student might say it differently. So I just want to acknowledge that. So it's those states immediately after death. And so anyway, that's part of what's coming into my mind. And so in reference to what we're talking about, it's so easy to get distracted by the lesser lights instead of going for that brilliant light where it makes our body tingle in a good way. And we know we're in right alignment. And if at the end time we have to stand and account for, did we do what was ours to do? This is the thing that if we didn't do it, we know we had I know I'd failed. And so there's something about what we're talking about. I think that in day-to-day life, it's so easy to forget the one thing, because usually that one thing isn't urgent. Now, there may be time periods like it's urgent. Like I think for you, the golden cage is one of those one things. And right now is an urgent time for that because everything's coming together. It's important and it's urgent. It's got to have focus now. But many times that one thing isn't something that has that sense of urgency. And so then all the little things come in, and those are important too. So finding our way with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because you're right. What's happening with the golden cage is like my number one thing right now, and the cat is sick.
Yeah.
The cat is bleeding, and so that then becomes, that's the most important thing that takes precedence. Um, and I think we're always balancing and juggling and seeing that. I want to come back. We keep, no matter what we end up talking about, we seem to keep talking about vision lately.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been thinking about that the power and the importance of being seen by others in to help us feel like we exist. Being
Mm-hmm.
seen is really important. And I also know in the Golden Cage, this huge moment happens at the end of the play where Althea, so there's a person in the cage and there's a person, this bird, blah, blah. And anyway, this person who's self-isolated and is so isolated, there's a moment when she literally says, all at once I saw my life as I had been when I was small, when I had seen the glory, or of the greatest prize of all, and I had vowed before I died that I would find my way inside, that I would be the one to prove the myth was true, that I would find the golden cage.
Mm-hmm.
And we realize in that moment that she had completely forgotten her purpose, that she had been in such self-isolation, and by trying to protect herself, by trying to lock herself in, to protection, she had completely forgotten her purpose. She
Mm-hmm.
couldn't see it anymore. It was vague. And I think this happens, I just keep thinking, having others see us is such a powerful, important, like that's part of therapy, is having
Mm-hmm.
someone see you. It's part of mentorship, that a mentor can see the greatness that you're hiding from yourself. And then there's this diffusion that happens all the time, in a moment when we can see clearly, there is such relief. And to a certain extent, emergencies give that.
Mm-hmm.
The cat is an emergency. And
Right.
so there's a relief in, like, oh my God, I know that's the important thing to do, versus trying to not make mistakes in a
Right.
bunch of other places. So can we talk about, I guess, like trying to do things right? What that plays into that diffusion. So what is it that plays into that plays into the diffusion that we might be able to identify and kind of pull out? And what does Carl Jung have to say about that? Because you're the Jungian psychoanalyst, and I know there's
Yeah.
really important stuff in there.
Well, Jung says that every individual psyche has a gradient that the libido will follow, that one psychic energy or life force will follow if left unobstructed. The problem is that in the socialization process, usually that occurs the first, 4 to 5 years of life, libido gets obstructed, and then these templates, these experiences, let me say it this way, the experiences become templates that we then just automatically live by without even knowing it. So we end up living in a template of feeling like, I can't self-express because someone's going to get angry and hit me. Or we live in a template that I'm always bad and I have to always be apologizing. And we aren't even cognitively aware of these things. We don't even, it's not like we're sitting around telling ourselves these things, but yet these are unconscious operating principles that govern us. And I think that from a Jungian perspective, we have to be willing to become conscious of these unconscious templates and be willing to connect with our bit of self that's still caught in that template, and appreciate that at the time that was the best option our psyche could offer us, but it's not the best option now. As an adult, we have far more capacity and resources, both inner and outer, than we do as 6-month-olds or 2-year-olds or 3-year-olds. And we live in a culture that is so ego driven and goal oriented. And there's so much psychology and pop psychology and spirituality that somehow keeps promoting the idea ego can figure it out and lead. And truth, we can't. To stay in that beam of of light that's the strongest, we ego have to look for something greater than ourself, to use the language of AA. And Jungian psychology is the larger self that we get to know and all of these diffuse currents. But the diffuse also leads back to the central sun. I'm thinking about the image of the sun now, and how on a sunny day you sometimes see these rays that are more concentrated, and and at the same time there are these little beams coming out that are more diffuse, but they all lead to the sun. And so the other thing that's important in Jungian psychology and working with ourselves towards wholeness is when I get caught in, quote, a lesser light, when I get caught in something where my energy, it isn't my central life's purpose, but it's related 10 gates out, that still leads on that path. So I think we have to not be judgmental of ourselves. We have to be willing to look at, where is the bit of my true self, if I want to use that language, in this diffuse state.
You just said something, and I want to just run back on it. You said 10 gates out, and then you said we have to not be judgmental about ourselves. So I'm sensing what I'm seeing, and I'm seeing this. If left unobstructed, that would be the true self, and then you said we need to connect to something greater than ourselves. And yet my sense is, from what you said, is that if left unobstructed, that is, whatever that is completely connected, and maybe even a representative, or like whatever, a node of something greater than ourselves. And then the things, the thing, like what I imagine when you said 10 gates out is, the next gate is that we get one of these templates. And then the next gate out is judging that we have the template. And I don't know if that's what you were saying, but as you were talking, I was also thinking of another line at the very end of the Golden Cage, this show about how ambition and self-isolation just disconnects us from each other. And at the end, when one of the characters realizes what it is that makes the cage close down, and she says, you build your cage from dreams that died, and every heartache that you've ever held inside. You forge the bars from every pain and sorrow that you've known. And in your cage, you are alone. And what they're realizing at that moment is that it's not the cage that traps you. It's that when you lock yourself inside of it, when you don't let the light of you out, when you forget who you are, when you hide yourself in all this protection. So my sense is that, and then outside of that, we in society, I mean, this is a parable, so they don't have to go into in society, and then my mother, and because they're just archetypes, not just archetypes. But my sense is, we are already in that cage from the beginning, and that cage being, what we're protecting, our protection, just protecting ourselves, right?
I'm not so I'm not so sure how to answer that question.
Okay.
But let me respond to it this way. If we believe that there is a gradient that our libido will follow, and that the total self we are, the authentic self we are, holds all of that, then in a positive sense, the golden cage is the totality of the self we are. But you're also talking about defenses, and where the golden cage is an ego built, or a persona driven accomplishment that we mistake for being our authentic self. And I think this is part of what happens for both Althea and Boris in the Golden Cage. Once they each in their own time found the golden cage, they lock themselves in because they mistake that for being the fullness of who they are, when it was just indeed one expression of who they are. And at the end, when Althea returns to help Boris become free, she's had that realization. And so, and from a perspective of Jungian psychology, the first cage we all have to get free from are our personas, the roles that we fall into and that sometimes we develop and cultivate with lots of focus. Because although I have a role as, for instance, a Jungian psychoanalyst, I'm so much more than that. And until I look beyond or look back from, that's probably a better image. I look back from, oh yeah, I work as a Jungian psychoanalyst, and that is a role, that's a persona I have. But where's the real me rooted? Because the real me is much bigger than that. And as in Jungian psychology, we can begin to get that. Our ego, instead of always looking outside, starts to look within. So that then whatever roles we are in is informed by our larger self, which means that role or persona doesn't get static or dead or rigidified or calcified or caught as the servant of collectives shoulds, must, and ought tos.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, let me go back. I was like, wow.
I realized maybe I needed to be quiet.
I don't know. I was totally taken up by that. And I also want to say that we are streaming this live on YouTube, and that means that if you put comments in the chat, we can see them. Theoretically, we can see them, and it's wonderful when people actually are also part of this conversation, because we don't come here to be like, this is what I know and so this is how it is, but we come here with a question and to discover and explore it. So I was really, you've said the word gradient several times, and then you also say, I really was powerful when you say we're like in the Golden Cage, which is the musical that I'm just about to release on film through the streaming musicals platform. And it's a parable, which I'm realizing is really an autobiography. And it's really an autobiography of me having split into two characters, literally, and living my life as those two characters, and then finally coming back together. But we mistake we mistake something for being the fullness of who we are. And then you also talked, so I'm interested about the gradient because I'm use gradients in Photoshop, and but I'm also interested in what you talked about in terms of roles, because not only are these two actors playing roles that represent, a parable in my own life, but in my other life, in coaching Harp as in creativity, we're going through the strings of passion, which is the 7 principles that bring us from creative impulse to creative expression. And we're right now at the center between, there's impulse, there's structure, there's character, and then there's roles. And in between character and roles, that's between, when we can express ourselves fully by ourselves with a structure and an impulse and with our own character. As soon as we add roles, we open up to other people in ourselves and other people outside ourselves. So there's this really beautiful region right here between character and roles, and the roles that take us in, like the roles that, like a baseball player has a position they play, and that's how baseball players can play together, because they're playing one game together. They don't need to know each other, but they play their roles. And in between is this is something where the role actually informs the character, or the character can inform the role. You can use an archetype to open up a whole level of character within you. Now, I feel like I'm taking us on some other trip here. We're talking about vision, being seen, seeing ourselves, how the soul, if left unobstructed, I don't know the next part of that, but that life is all about those, having those obstructions kind of happen to us, and then we dismantle them through our lives. And So where does this fit? You brought up the word role. And basically, we're talking about being able to have laser vision to do something, to have focus, versus how we get fragmented or diffuse.
Yeah. So, I think it's important that we, sometimes we, not just you and I, but everybody uses terms differently.
Mm.
So, from a Jungian perspective, an archetype is a universal energetic template that always expresses through an instinct. And we have no control over archetypes or instincts. And that all religious traditions are invoking archetypes, they're invoking energies that are bigger than ourselves. And hedonism invoked the instincts, which are bigger than ourselves. So the work of the human being is finding oneself, locating oneself, and how those are expressing through oneself, which means that although just like our physical body, our skeletons all have the basic structure, we all are fleshed out differently. Our psyche has these basic instincts and archetypes, but they're all fleshed out differently. I think in terms of what we're talking about today with how do you focus when your light's gotten diffuse? I know for me right now, when I look from the outside perspective, I've got like 7 or 8 major balls in the air that are all related to my professional work. And so we might say, albeit those all come under the umbrella of Jungian psychoanalysts, there are also different nuanced roles that I'm playing as the Jungian psychoanalyst. It's not all the same. What we do together, what I do in my office with people one-on-one, what I do when I'm teaching training candidates are all different. They all come from the role of Jungian analyst, but there are variations of that role, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Then there's my role as a harpist. There's my role as a wife. There's my role as a sister. There's other roles or personas that are important to me that I don't want all of my energy just going into my professional life. That wouldn't be healthy. I want to be whole. I want to be balanced. And so one of the questions I'm asking myself right now, because 7 or 8 balls in my professional work life starts to crowd out the other roles. It starts to mean that I don't have quality time at my heart. It starts to mean that I don't always get to have quality time with the people I love. And over the long haul, that's not healthy. So I'm asking myself, of these 7 or 8 balls, where are the strongest energy currents? What is it that, again, is closest to that central ray of my intention, my sacred intention, and my work as a Jungian psychoanalyst? So I think some of it has to do with accepting our limitations and knowing that it's only within our limitations we can really live the fullness of who we are. And our culture makes the mistake of believing we can all have it all. And the truth is, I can't have it all. I cannot successfully do these 8 balls and be available to my husband in a way that's going to continue to deepen our intimate connection. I can't do those 8 balls and have quality harp time at least 4 or 5 times a week. And so I think that part of the diffuseness is recognizing our limitation, and vision connects to this, and that the vision becomes the tether we keep coming back to. And it's not a tether that means we don't do things that have life for us, but it's actually the tether that helps us live the life that's ours now. Because often we get caught in, once I get this project done, once I get this thing, then and it never happens.
As you were talking about the balls in the air, so I imagined all the balls in the air, and then I, of course, imagined that they had a sound. And you said 7 or 8, and I was like, oh well, there are 7 or 8 notes in a key. And so I started thinking, and then you started talking about, and then I wrote a role is in relation to something. I kept seeing that
Mhm.
there was these roles were in relation to something, and I don't know what this is about to show, but I know, and then I was thinking, is there something underneath all those balls that so that you only have to remember one thing? Is there something underneath there? My harp's not really in tune, and I don't know if you can hear it well, but it made me think about the fact that, and you can just physically see this. All these balls, like I'm playing all these notes and I'm singing all these melodies, but they're all in relationship to each other because I'm in a certain key. I can do many things within that key without changing that key, but I can also change that. Now I'm in a different key. There's a different set of 7 balls up in the air. Or maybe they're the same 7 balls, just one is a little bit different. And they're all going, but there's something at the center. But I've modulated and I'm thinking in a different way. Then I can modulate back. Maybe I'm still out of tune, but I'm in a different place or back. So it made me, I just, like I said, I saw it visually and then I saw that harmonically and then I thought about, what key are we in at any one time? Can we hold to that? So long as I know what key I'm in, and one of the amazing things about the harp that is different than any other instrument and it grounds you is that the harp is literally in a key.
Mhm.
The,
Mhm.
y- the I don't have to the shapes are all the same from key to key. This is not true in any other instrument, and if I can just keep in mind what key I'm in, which I can always reference by looking and seeing how have I set those
Mhm.
levers, then all the relationships kind of fit in, and I don't have
Mhm.
to think about, it's this note and this note and this note is relationship. No, I've set the harp into a key
Mhm.
that has a specific 7 balls,
Mhm. Mhm.
and then I dance with those balls. So why am I saying this? I have no idea. This is it's just that's how I saw it as you were talking. That only has 5 balls. So
Yeah.
so let's go back to our question. And one of the things I really love about our conversations is that there's always a point in our conversations when I'm like, how are we ever going to get back to the theme from this? I wonder how that will happen. Um, our initial question, I don't even know how I wrote it, but it's focus. What happens when it gets diffuse? So what happens, like for example, okay, this is out of tune, but also what if accidentally there were a whole bunch of, all the levers were like,
Yeah.
I'm playing all the shapes that I think I should have, but it's all completely out. How do I start coming back? How do I start finding so I can get back at least, in the harmony that I'm trying to play?
Yeah, that's really a great example because when we don't follow the gradient of our own libido, it becomes discordant. And we
Uh-huh.
feel that internally and we see it in our life. And just like you had to slow down and
Mm.
listen string by string to know where to flip the levers to get back in your key, the key you wanted to be in, we have to be willing to slow down and listen to every diffuse state we're in to fine tune it to our key. So this is where I was saying earlier, everything we do ultimately leads to the total self we are, but we have to slow down to fine tune.
Now,
And
how will we know when something's discordant? I mean, I
oh,
know what the
you feel it and you hear it just like we hear it with our ears
mm,
on the literally physical ears on the heart. You also felt it in your body. There was a felt sense that wasn't tangible through your 5 physical senses, but was informed by your physical senses. That same felt sense will come up energetically when we're dealing with our psychological being.
Could you give an example?
Well, when you put that key, that one string, the lever down, didn't
Mm-hmm.
you feel the sense of relief in your body and this sense of opening? You know,
Well, I felt
when
the
we're,
sense that it was coming
yeah.
into. I mean, there's another beauty in that the randomness that I could have fun with if that's what I was doing, but I it was coming into true with
Uh-huh.
that key. But that key is also, historically, it's music that we've been given. It's Western music. I mean, there anyway. We won't go into that this time. Can you give an example in another part of life where I might be able to experience the discordance as clearly as I can with with the harp?
Oh yeah. So you're in a job with a boss who's really critical and you're miserable and you don't sleep. You find yourself overeating to maintain the stress. You quit going to the gym. You start turning on yourself with self-hating comments. That's a discordant state, you know? And so as you can begin to change what you can change, you interrupt your self-talk, you start looking at how to affirm yourself, you make sure you get the time back to get your eating back on track and your food back on track. You begin to look at how you need to communicate differently to the boss. You see if things are going to change there, and if not, then maybe you start looking for another job. I mean, it is a resonance. Just like with the harp, we literally hear and we feel the resonance of every string. We feel the resonance of our own being. We will never be able to get it with our head. Never.
Well,
This is one of the mistakes of our culture.
I mean,
We
I'm really
only know it in the body.
I'm really taken by two things. First of all, how you noticed and were able to describe what I did in order that I slowed down in order to listen.
Mm.
The second thing that I'm really want to ask about is when you describe this thing, you're having trouble with your boss and then you do this and then you do that. My first thought was like, well, deal with the boss immediately. And I was really impressed that you instead went in the other direction and I can't even remember the first thing you started with, but I know that there was food and there was taking care of
Mhm.
your time and all these things that are only that it almost feels like what you're talking about is there's a thing that's happening outside in the world,
Mhm.
and then there's all the stuff we're doing on on the inside, like, um, and that's the first stuff. Those are the first things. And it's just making me think about the serenity prayer. Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change things I can, but the big thing is and know the difference. And really be able to see, because I realized I would have gone immediately for the thing, change the person, change the other person.
Yeah, and this is one of the important hallmarks of Jungian psychology
Hmm.
is it's very rooted in alchemy, which says as within, so without,
Hmm.
that it is our inner world that is actually creating the filters through which we experience the outer world. If you want to be in a different position and different relationships in the outer world, you deal with the inside and you change the inside. That doesn't mean there's not a reality to the outside world. Like in my example, maybe this boss is super critical and they're never going to be anything but. And if you change your inner world, you're going to take yourself out of that situation and get yourself into a situation where there is a boss who may be a mentor.
Right.
So we make the mistake of trying to change the outside world, and then we keep ending up in the same situation, although it may be different characters, different people, different
Right.
situation, time, and place, but it's the same old script again
Right.
because we don't deal with the inner script.
So I know we have to wrap up. We have like
Yeah.
2 or 3 minutes. And so what I saw as you were talking was that the thing that we're looking through, somehow first we want to shift that thing that we're looking through. If we're seeing that there's all this diffusion on the outside, it's actually happening in that. I saw whatever
Yeah.
magnifier thing. Um, all right, so let's. Thank you. This is so. I really want to come back and listen to this one. And so I'm. Let's come up with like three actions, or one or two, to think about, that we can put into play, and that other people can put into play if they want. And I'm gonna look. I'm going to be looking for, like really what is the key I'm in? What is my home? What is,
Mhm.
what is the fundamental of what I'm trying to do, first of all? So that's how I'm going to think about life as music. And then I'm just going to take two. And then from a visual standpoint, just whatever I'm seeing on the outside, think what small adjustment can I make on the inside that might help me see this in a way that's more focused towards my fundamental.
Yes, I like that. Yeah.
And how about you?
The first thing is slowing down. I'm going
Right.
to slow down. Instead of rushing from thing to thing, I'm going to slow down. Or if I feel scattered, I'm going to slow down, go to my breath to come back to the moment. And then the second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to listen for what's concordant with me. Where am I in resonance with myself, and where is there discord? And then once I know where there's concordance and where there's discord, the third thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put energy, I'm going to identify where's the resonance at, and how can I support myself in more of that, and what is the discord about, and where can I fine tune in that area to be in harmony with me.
That's really beautiful. I love that. And you're bringing me back to that example and realizing how I can slow down and change one little thing that will
Right.
bring back into my fundamental harmony.
That's right.
Mm,
And just like on the harp, the more you play the harp and the more you change those levers, the more quickly you can do that.
right.
And our life, the more that we work and fine tuning ourselves, then the more quickly we are able to come back into harmony with ourselves.
Wow. Well, thank you, Kathleen.
Yeah.
I'm really, I realize why this is called Jung at Harp. I mean, that it's about music, it's about all the skills and the experience and that you have, the specific skills that I have as a musician and composer,
Mhm.
and that you have as a Jungian psychoanalyst, and then where we meet at the strings of
Yeah.
the harp. So thank you so much, and thank you everyone for being with us here today, and I look forward to seeing all of you again next week.
Bye bye.
Bye bye. This is when I have to figure